I never thought keeping a secret could kill a part of you. Not physically, not in any way doctors could diagnose, but there's a death that happens inside when you carry a lie for too long, a slow erosion of who you used to be, and by the time you realize it, the person you were before the lie barely exists anymore. My mother died on a Thursday in November. It was raining. I remember because I kept thinking how unfair it was that the sky couldn't even give her sunshine on her last day. She went peacefully, they said, slipped away in her sleep at the hospice, surrounded by flowers I'd brought the day before and the soft hum of the machines that had kept her comfortable. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. And in that moment, as her grip loosened and her chest stopped rising, I felt something crack inside me that I still haven't been able to repair. Because my mother died believing a lie I'd told her, a lie I'd maintained for 7 years, a lie so deeply woven into the fabric of our relationship that she went to her grave thinking she knew me, thinking she knew our family, thinking she understood the life she'd lived. She didn't. And I'm the reason she never found out the truth. This is my confession, not because I want forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it, but because I need to say it out loud, to let these words exist somewhere outside my own head. Maybe then the weight will become bearable. Maybe then I can figure out how to live with what I did, or what I didn't do. My name is Daniel Ashford. I'm 36 years old. I work as a corporate attorney at a mid-sized firm in Chicago. I have a younger sister named Claire, a father named Richard, and a mother who was named Eleanor. Was. That word still catches in my throat every time I have to use it. To understand why I lied to her, you need to understand who she was. My mother was the kind of woman who made everyone feel seen. She had this way of listening that made you believe your words actually mattered. When you talked to her, she looked at you like you were the only person in the room, like whatever small problem you were dealing with was worth her full attention. She was a high school English teacher for 32 years, retired when I was in my late 20s. She loved poetry, especially Frost and Dickinson. She could quote entire passages from memory and would often do so at dinner, much to my father's feigned annoyance. She was gentle, patient, devoted to her family in a way that sometimes felt suffocating when I was a teenager, but came to feel like the most precious gift as I got older. She believed in the goodness of people, truly believed it, even when evidence suggested otherwise. She thought if you loved someone enough, if you gave them enough grace, they would eventually rise to meet it. That belief was beautiful. It was also dangerously naive, because my father was not a good man, not in the ways that mattered most. And my mother never knew. She died thinking he was flawed but faithful, difficult but devoted, stubborn but ultimately true. She was wrong about all of it, and I knew. I knew the truth for 7 years, and I chose to let her die in ignorance. Let me take you back to where it started, to the night that changed everything. I was 29 years old. I'd just made junior partner at my firm, a milestone I'd been working toward for years. It felt like validation of every late night, every missed dinner, every sacrifice I'd made in the name of building a career. My parents came to visit for a long weekend to celebrate. My mother was so proud she could barely contain herself. She kept touching my face, telling me how handsome I looked in my new office, asking if I was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of myself. My father was more reserved. He shook my hand, said he was proud, but there was something distant in his eyes. I attributed it to typical Richard Ashford behavior. He'd never been effusive with praise. He believed accomplishments should speak for themselves. I thought nothing of it. That weekend, we had dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. My mother told stories about my childhood, about the time I'd tried to sue my sister for stealing my Halloween candy when I was 8. Everyone laughed. It was warm and comfortable and felt like what family was supposed to be. On Saturday afternoon, my parents said they were going to explore the city while I finished up some work at the office. My mother wanted to see the Art Institute. My father reluctantly agreed to join her, or so I thought, because that evening, as I was leaving my office around 7, I saw him, my father, walking into a hotel across the street from my building. And he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, blonde, maybe late 30s, well-dressed. She was laughing at something he said, and his hand was on the small of her back in a way that was too familiar, too intimate to be anything other than what it looked like. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. The city moved around me, people rushing past, taxis honking, the ordinary chaos of a Saturday night in Chicago. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I told myself I was wrong. I must have been wrong. That couldn't have been my father. It was someone who looked like him, a doppelganger, a trick of the light. But I knew. In my gut, I knew. Still, I did nothing that night. I went home. I drank half a bottle of scotch. I called my mother to check in and listened to her talk about the beautiful Monet paintings she'd seen, about how she wished I'd been there to see them with her. "Where was Dad?" I'd asked. "Oh, he went back to the hotel early," she said he wasn't feeling well, probably just tired from the flight. I felt sick. The next few weeks were torture. I couldn't focus on work. I snapped at colleagues. I barely slept. The image of my father with that woman played on repeat in my mind, a film reel I couldn't shut off. I thought about confronting him. I drafted texts I never sent. I wrote letters I burned. I picked up the phone a dozen times and put it back down, because confronting him meant making it real. And if it was real, then everything I believed about my family, about my parents' marriage, about the life I'd grown up in, was a lie. So I did something else instead, something that would ultimately determine the course of the next 7 years. I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Webb, retired police detective, now doing private work. Discreet, professional, highly recommended by a colleague who'd used him for a messy divorce case. I told Marcus what I'd seen. I told him I needed to know the truth. 2 weeks later, he delivered a folder to my office. Photographs, phone records, credit card statements, a timeline of hotel bookings and restaurant reservations and flights to cities my father had no business visiting. The woman's name was Patricia Connolly. She was 38 years old, divorced, living in a suburb about 40 minutes from my parents' house in Philadelphia. She worked as an administrative assistant at a medical supply company. She and my father had been seeing each other for 12 years. 12 years. I read that number several times to make sure I'd understood it correctly. 12 years. My father had been having an affair for more than a decade, since I was 17. Since before I graduated high school, since before I went to college, law school, maid partner, all those years, all those family dinners and holiday gatherings and phone calls where he'd pass the receiver to my mother after a few minutes, saying he had to get back to whatever he was doing. What he was doing was living a second life. But that wasn't even the worst part. The folder contained one more piece of information. One more truth that Marcus delivered with the grim efficiency of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by secrets. Patricia Connolly had a son. His name was Andrew. He was 11 years old, and according to Marcus's investigation, my father was listed on his birth certificate as the father. I have a half-brother. I had a half-brother for 11 years, and I never knew he existed. I don't know how long I sat in my office after reading that. Hours, maybe. The sun went down. The cleaning crew came and went. My phone buzzed with messages I ignored. All I could think about was my mother who had dedicated her entire life to her family, who had sacrificed career opportunities to stay home with us when we were young, who had forgiven my father's long work hours and business trips and emotional distance because she believed he was doing his best. She believed in him, and he had another family. The question I faced in that moment was simple but impossible. What do I do with this? I could tell her. I could show her the evidence and let her make her own choices. She was an adult. She deserved to know the truth about her own marriage. But I knew my mother. I knew her heart. I knew that learning this truth wouldn't free her, it would destroy her. She was 63 years old. She and my father had been married for 37 years. Her entire identity was built around her family, her marriage, the life they'd created together. Learning that it was all a lie wouldn't give her liberation or closure. It would give her devastation. It would rewrite her entire past into something unbearable. And there was something else, something I didn't know at the time, but would learn soon enough. The following month, my mother was diagnosed with early-stage ovarian cancer. I remember the phone call. I was at work reviewing a contract when my sister Claire called. Her voice was strange, tight in a way I'd never heard before. "Mom's sick," she said. "It's cancer. She starts treatment next week." The world tilted. For the second time in a month, everything I thought I knew seemed to collapse beneath me. I flew to Philadelphia that weekend. I sat with my mother in her living room as she explained the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the prognosis. The doctors were optimistic, she said. They'd caught it relatively early. She had a good chance. She was so calm, so measured, so focused on reassuring us that she would be fine. My father sat next to her holding her hand, the same hand that had been on another woman's back in that hotel lobby, the same hand that had signed a birth certificate for a son my mother didn't know existed. I looked at him and felt nothing but rage, but I also made a decision in that moment, a decision that would haunt me for years. I would not tell her, not now. Not while she was fighting for her life, not while she needed every ounce of strength and hope and love to survive. The truth could wait. The truth had to wait. So I buried it. I took that folder Marcus had given me and I locked it in a safe deposit box at my bank. I pushed the knowledge to the back of my mind and focused on being the supportive son my mother needed. I told myself it was temporary. Once she was better, once she was in remission, I would figure out what to do. Maybe I'd confront my father privately. Maybe I'd give her the choice of whether she wanted to know. Maybe by then, the affair would have ended and the truth would be less devastating. I told myself a lot of things. My mother's treatment lasted 8 months. Chemotherapy, surgery, more chemotherapy. I watched her lose her hair, her appetite, her energy, but never her spirit. She faced every setback with grace and determination. She made jokes with her nurses. She sent thank you cards to her doctors. She told me not to worry so much, that I needed to focus on my own life, my own career. I couldn't tell her that focusing on anything but her was impossible. Throughout those 8 months, I watched my father play the devoted husband. He drove her to every appointment. He held her hand during chemo. He made her tea and brought her blankets and told her how beautiful she looked, even when she was gaunt and pale and nothing like the vibrant woman she'd been. And every time I saw him touch her, comfort her, care for her, I wanted to scream, because I knew. I knew about Patricia. I knew about Andrew. I knew that somewhere in a suburb 40 minutes away, there was another family waiting for him, a woman who probably thought she was special, a boy who probably wondered why his father could only visit sometimes. The hypocrisy was suffocating. But I said nothing. By the end of that year, my mother was in remission. The cancer had responded to treatment. The doctors were pleased, cautiously optimistic. She would need regular monitoring, but for now, she was okay. I remember the day she got the news. She cried. My father cried. Claire cried. And I cried too, but for different reasons than they thought. Because remission meant I had to decide. The temporary excuse I'd given myself was no longer valid. She was better. She was going to live. The truth was sitting in that safe deposit box, waiting for me, but I couldn't do it. I told myself she was still fragile, still recovering. The stress of learning about the affair could trigger a relapse. The doctors had said emotional well-being was important for recovery. How could I justify destroying her peace of mind when she just fought so hard to survive? So I waited, and I kept waiting. Months turned into a year turned into 2. My mother stayed in remission. She regained her strength, her hair, her joy. She started volunteering at the local library. She took up watercolor painting. She told me she felt like she'd been given a second chance at life. How could I take that away from her? The longer I waited, the harder it became to imagine ever telling her. The secret calcified inside me, becoming part of who I was. I built walls around it. I learned to look at my father without flinching. I learned to smile at family gatherings and pretend everything was normal. I became an expert liar, not in words, but in silence, in what I didn't say, in the questions I didn't ask, in the confrontations I never initiated. And the whole time, I told myself I was protecting her, that this was an act of love, that some truths are too cruel to share. But there's a cost to that kind of protection. There's a cost to carrying a secret that big, for that long. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd wake at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding, tangled in dreams where I was trying to speak but no words would come. I developed anxiety that I'd never had before. I started avoiding my parents' visits, making excuses about work, about being too busy, about travel. The truth is, I couldn't look at my mother without feeling like a fraud. Every time she told me she loved me, every time she said she was proud of me, every time she looked at me with those warm, trusting eyes, I felt the weight of what I was hiding. She trusted me completely, and I was lying to her face. The worst moments were when she talked about my father. How grateful she was that he'd been so supportive during her illness. How lucky she felt to have a husband who still loved her after all these years. How she knew their marriage wasn't perfect, but she believed they'd built something real, something lasting. I'd nod and smile and agree, and inside I'd be screaming. My sister Claire noticed something was wrong. She asked me once during a phone call if I was okay. I seemed distant, she said, distracted, not like myself. I brushed it off. Work stress, I said, big cases, long hours. She accepted it because she had no reason not to, because lying had become so natural to me that the words came out smooth and convincing. But Claire was also dealing with her own issues. She'd gotten married young, at 23, to a man named Greg who I'd never particularly liked. By her late 20s, the marriage was falling apart. Infidelity, ironically enough. Greg had been cheating on her with a coworker. I remember sitting with her after she found out. She was devastated, heartbroken, questioning everything she thought she knew about her own life. How did I miss it? She asked me. How did I not see what was happening right in front of me? I told her it wasn't her fault. I told her that people who want to hide things can be very good at it. I told her that trusting someone doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. And the whole time, I was thinking about our mother who trusted our father the same way Claire had trusted Greg, our mother who would ask the same questions if she ever found out. Claire divorced Greg. She moved back to Philadelphia to be closer to our parents while she figured out her next steps. And I watched her rebuild her life, slowly and painfully, watched her grow stronger from the truth she'd been forced to confront. I wondered if my mother could do the same. I wondered if knowing the truth, even if it hurt, would ultimately be better than living in ignorance. But I never found out, because I never told her. 3 years after her initial remission, the cancer came back. This time, it was more aggressive. It had spread to her lymph nodes. The prognosis was different now. The doctors were less optimistic. They talked about managing symptoms, maintaining quality of life, making the most of the time she had. I understood what they meant, even when they didn't say it directly. My mother was dying, and once again, I faced the question I'd been avoiding for years. Do I tell her? Do I give her the truth before it's too late? But now the calculus was different. Now she wasn't just recovering from an illness. She was facing the end of her life. And the idea of spending her final months processing betrayal, dealing with the collapse of everything she believed about her marriage, seemed unimaginably cruel. So I made the same choice again. Silence. I told myself it was merciful. I told myself I was giving her peace. I told myself she deserved to die believing she'd been loved faithfully, even if it wasn't true. But there's another part of me that wonders if I was just a coward, if I was protecting myself as much as I was protecting her. Because telling her the truth would have meant watching her pain. It would have meant being the one who destroyed her world. It would have meant taking responsibility for a revelation that would change everything. And I wasn't brave enough for that. So instead, I spent her final year being the perfect son. I visited every weekend. I called every day. I sat with her while she went through treatment, held her hand while she cried, told her stories to make her laugh. I brought her favorite flowers and read her poetry and reminded her how much she was loved. And I lied. Every day, in every moment, I lied. Not with words, with silence, with the things I didn't say, with the truth I kept locked away. I watched my father play the devoted husband again. Watched him hold her and comfort her and promise her that he'd be lost without her. And I said nothing. There were moments when I came close. Moments when the words were on the tip of my tongue. Once, late at night in the hospice, when she was drifting in and out of consciousness, I sat beside her bed and whispered that there was something I needed to tell her. Her eyes fluttered open. "What is it, sweetheart?" I looked at her face, thin, pale, but still somehow beautiful, still somehow full of love. "I just wanted you to know I'm proud to be your son," I said. "That's all." She smiled, squeezed my hand. The moment passed. The night she died, I was alone with her. Claire had gone home to rest. My father was in the cafeteria, getting coffee. It was just the two of us in that quiet room. The only sounds, the soft beeping of machines and the rain against the window. She'd been unconscious for hours, but suddenly her eyes opened, clearer than they'd been in days. She looked at me with an intensity that made my chest ache. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here. I need you to know something," she said. "I've had a good life, a beautiful life. Your father, you, your sister, that's all I ever wanted." I felt tears streaming down my face. "I know," I said. "I know, Mom." She smiled. That same warm, trusting smile she'd always had. "You're such a good son," she said. "I'm so lucky." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to fall to my knees and beg for forgiveness. But I just held her hand and said, "I love you." A few minutes later, she closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, and then it stopped, and she was gone. I don't know how long I sat there after. I couldn't move, couldn't cry, couldn't do anything but stare at her face and think about all the things I'd never said. When my father came back with his coffee, I finally stood up. I looked at him, and something in me broke. "She's gone," I said. He looked at her. His face crumpled. He cried, reaching for her hand, calling her name. I watched him grieve, and I felt nothing but cold, crystalline rage. The funeral was a week later. My mother would have loved it. So many people came. Former students, colleagues, neighbors, friends. They all shared stories about how she'd touched their lives, how her kindness had made a difference. My father gave a eulogy. He talked about how much he loved her, how she was the light of his life, how he didn't know how he would go on without her. Every word was a knife in my chest, because I knew the truth. I knew about Patricia. I knew about Andrew. I knew that somewhere out there was another woman who thought she was special, another child who was waiting for his father to come home. And my mother would never know any of it. After the funeral, there was a reception at my parents' house. People brought food and shared memories and offered condolences. I moved through it like a ghost, shaking hands, accepting hugs, saying the right things at the right times. At some point, I found myself in my mother's study. It was a small room off the kitchen, filled with books and artwork and the faint scent of lavender that she'd always loved. I sat at her desk and stared at the photograph on the wall. Her and my father on their wedding day, young and hopeful, with their whole lives ahead of them. I thought about the 38 years they'd been married, about the life they'd built, the children they'd raised, the home they'd shared, about all the moments that now felt tainted by what I knew, and I thought about what I was going to do next. Because the thing about carrying a secret that long is that it becomes part of you. It changes the way you see the world. It corrupts your relationships, your sense of self, your ability to trust. I'd spent 7 years protecting my mother from the truth, but she was gone now, and the truth was still there, heavy and poisonous, demanding to be acknowledged. I couldn't keep silent anymore, but I also couldn't just confront my father directly. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what he'd done. Not until I had a plan. So I did what I'd done 7 years earlier. I called Marcus Webb. He met me at a coffee shop the following week. He looked older, grayer, but still had the same sharp eyes I remembered. I told him I needed an update. Everything that had happened since his last investigation. Patricia, Andrew, any other secrets my father might be hiding. Marcus didn't ask why. He just nodded and said he'd be in touch. 3 weeks later, he delivered another folder. What I found inside was worse than I'd imagined. The affair with Patricia had continued throughout my mother's illness, throughout her treatment, throughout her final year. My father had visited her at least twice a week, sometimes more. He'd taken her on trips while telling my mother he was at conferences. He'd spent thousands of dollars on her, money from accounts my mother didn't know existed. Andrew was now 18. He was in his first year of college. My father was paying his tuition, but that wasn't even the most damaging revelation. According to Marcus's investigation, my father had been siphoning money from a family trust for years. Money that was supposed to be my mother's. Money that should have gone to me and Claire after her death. He'd been funneling it to Patricia, to Andrew, to the life he'd built without us. I sat in my car after reading the folder and felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there. The guilt was still there. But now there was something else too. Resolve. My father had lied to all of us. He'd betrayed my mother. He'd stolen from his own children. He'd built a secret life on a foundation of deception. And he'd gotten away with it. For years he'd gotten away with it. But not anymore. I spent the next 3 months planning. I'm a lawyer. I understand how evidence works. I understand how to build a case, and I was going to build the most comprehensive case possible. I gathered everything: financial records, phone logs, photographs, witness statements. I documented every transfer, every lie, every act of betrayal. I consulted with estate attorneys about the trust violations. I talked to forensic accountants about the missing money, and I waited. My father seemed to believe that my mother's death had freed him. He became less careful, less discreet. He started spending more time away from the house, more time with Patricia, more time living the life he'd been hiding for decades. He didn't know I was watching. He didn't know I knew everything. Claire noticed changes in him too. She called me one night, concerned. "Dad seems different," she said. "Distant. Like he's already moved on." I told her I'd noticed the same thing. I told her to be patient. I told her grief affects people in strange ways. I didn't tell her what I was planning. Part of me felt guilty about that. Claire deserved to know. She was my sister. We'd both lost our mother. We were both being betrayed. But I wanted to be sure. I wanted my case to be airtight before I brought anyone else in. I wanted there to be no possibility of denial, no room for excuses. And I wanted to control the revelation. I wanted it to happen on my terms. The moment came 6 months after my mother's death. My father had called a family meeting to discuss the estate. Claire flew in from Philadelphia. We gathered in the living room of our parents' house, surrounded by our mother's belongings, her photographs, her memories. My father talked about the will, about the distribution of assets, about the sentimental items and the practical decisions that needed to be made. I let him finish. I let him present his version of reality, and then I stood up. "Before we continue," I said, "there's something we need to discuss." My father looked at me with confusion. Claire looked at me with concern. "What is it?" my father asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. The folder Marcus had given me. The folder I'd been adding to for months. I set it on the coffee table. "For the past 7 years," I said, "I've known something that I kept from Mom. Something I kept from Claire. Something I thought I was protecting our family from." "Daniel, what is this?" Claire asked. I looked at my father. His face had gone pale. "7 years ago," I said, "I saw you, in Chicago, walking into a hotel with a woman named Patricia Connolly." The silence in the room was absolute. "I hired a private investigator," I continued. "I learned everything. The affair, Andrew, the money you've been stealing from Mom's trust." My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Mom never knew," I said. "She died believing you loved her, believing you were faithful, believing everything you told her was true." "Daniel," my father said. His voice was shaking. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. I understand that you've been living a double life for over 20 years. I understand that you have a son who's almost the same age as me. I understand that you've taken hundreds of thousands of dollars that should have gone to your legitimate children. Claire was staring at me, then at our father, then back at me. Her face had gone white. "Is this true?" she whispered. My father said nothing. I opened the folder. I spread the evidence across the coffee table. Photographs, bank statements, the birth certificate with his name on it. "It's all there," I said. "Every lie, every betrayal, every dollar." Claire picked up one of the photographs. It showed our father with Patricia and Andrew at what looked like a birthday party. Andrew was maybe 12 in the picture. They looked like a family. "Oh my God," Claire said. "Oh my God." My father stood up. He was trembling. "You had no right," he said. "This was none of your business." I almost laughed. "None of my business?" I repeated. "You betrayed our mother. You stole from our family. You lied to us for decades. How is that none of my business?" "You don't understand the pressure I was under," he said. "Your mother, she was wonderful, but she never understood me. Patricia and I, we had a connection." "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare try to justify this. Don't you dare make this about something Mom failed to give you." My father's face hardened. "I gave your mother a good life," he said. "I provided for this family. I was there for her when she was sick." "You were there physically," I said, "but you were lying to her every single day. You let her die believing she was loved faithfully. You let her think she knew who you were, and you let her die without knowing the truth," my father shot back. "You knew for 7 years and you said nothing. How is that any better?" The words hit me like a physical blow, because he was right. I had lied too. I had protected him, enabled him, by staying silent. I thought about that for a long moment, and then I spoke. "You're right," I said. "I kept your secret. I protected Mom from the truth because I thought it would destroy her. I thought she was better off not knowing." I paused, but I was wrong. My father blinked. "I should have told her," I said, "years ago. I should have given her the choice. She deserved to know who she was married to. She deserved to make her own decisions about her own life." I looked at Claire, who had tears streaming down her face. "And you deserve to know now," I said to her. "That's why I'm doing this. Not for revenge, not to hurt Dad, but because the truth matters, because we've all been living with lies for too long." Claire nodded slowly. She was still processing, still trying to absorb what she'd learned. My father sat back down. He suddenly looked older, smaller. "What do you want?" he asked. "What are you trying to accomplish here?" "I want the money back," I said. "Every dollar you took from Mom's trust. I want it returned. And I want you to acknowledge what you did, not just to me and Claire, to Andrew, to Patricia, to everyone you've been lying to. You want me to destroy my life," he said. "Your life was built on destruction," I said. "On Mom's ignorance, on our trust, on other people's pain." I stood up. "I've already spoken to an estate attorney," I said. "The trust violations are clear. We can pursue this legally if we need to. We can make this public. We can involve Patricia and Andrew." My father's face went gray. "Or," I said, "you can come clean. You can make this right. You can try to salvage whatever's left of your relationships by finally being honest." He said nothing. Claire stood up too. She walked over to me and took my hand. "I need time," she said, "to process this, to figure out what I want." "I understand," I said. She turned to our father. "I can't look at you right now," she said. "I can't be in this house. I'll be at Daniel's hotel." She walked out. I heard the front door close behind her. My father and I stood in silence. "This isn't over," he finally said. "You've made accusations, but people make mistakes. I don't have to accept this narrative you've constructed." I picked up the folder. "It's not a narrative," I said. "It's documentation. It's evidence. It's the truth." I walked toward the door. Then I stopped and turned back. "You know what the worst part is?" I said. "Mom loved you. Really loved you. She would have done anything for you. And you threw it away. You threw her away. For what? For a woman who was willing to share you with someone else? For a child you could only see a few times a week? I shook my head. She deserved better than you, I said. We all did. I left him standing there in our mother's house, surrounded by her belongings, her photographs, her memory. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was a beginning. The weeks that followed were complicated. Claire and I spent hours talking, crying, processing. She felt betrayed, not just by our father, but by me. I'd known for 7 years and said nothing. I'd let her grieve our mother without understanding the full context. I didn't blame her for being angry. I was angry at myself too, but eventually we found our way back to each other. We were all each other had left now. Our mother was gone. Our father was something we'd have to figure out how to deal with. The legal process was slow but steady. My father initially resisted, claiming I was exaggerating, misinterpreting the evidence. But when his own attorney reviewed the documentation, reality set in. The trust violations were undeniable. The financial evidence was clear. He had 2 choices: fight it publicly and risk exposure of everything, or settle quietly and preserve whatever dignity he had left. He chose to settle. Claire and I recovered most of the money he'd taken. We donated a portion to a cancer research foundation in our mother's name. It felt like something she would have wanted. As for our relationship with our father, it's complicated. Claire has more capacity for forgiveness than I do. She's met Andrew once, tentatively. She says he seems like a decent person, someone who was as much a victim of our father's lies as we were. I haven't been able to bring myself to meet him yet. Maybe someday, maybe never. My father reached out a few months ago. He wanted to talk, he said, to explain, to try to rebuild something. I didn't respond. Not because I hate him, though sometimes I do, but because I don't know how to trust him. I don't know if I ever will, and I'm okay with that ambiguity. For now. The harder thing, the thing I still struggle with every day, is what I did or didn't do. I knew for 7 years. I kept my father's secret. I let my mother die in ignorance. Was that protection? Or was it just another form of betrayal? I've turned that question over in my mind 1,000 times. I've imagined alternate versions of my life where I told her the truth. Some versions, she's devastated, but eventually finds peace. Other versions, the shock kills her faster than the cancer ever could. I'll never know which would have been real. What I do know is that I carried a burden I never should have carried alone. I made myself the guardian of a secret that wasn't mine to keep, and in doing so, I betrayed my mother too, in my own way. She deserved the truth, even if it hurt, even if it changed everything. She deserved to make her own choices about her own life. I took that away from her. That's my confession. That's what I have to live with. Most days, I can function. I go to work, I see friends, I live my life, but there are nights when the guilt is overwhelming. When I lie awake and imagine what I would say to her if I had one more chance. I'm sorry, Mom. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just afraid. Afraid of your pain. Afraid of losing you before I had to. Afraid of being the one who destroyed everything. I hope you can forgive me. I hope you're at peace. I hope, wherever you are, that you know I loved you. That I always loved you. That everything I did because I couldn't bear to see you hurt. Even if it was the wrong thing. Even if it was its own kind of lie. I visit her grave sometimes, usually on Sundays, when the cemetery is quiet. I bring flowers and sit on the grass and talk to her about my life. About work, about Claire, about the ordinary moments she would have loved to hear about. I never mention him. I never mention the secret. I just talk about the small things, the things that matter. Last week, I told her about a poem I'd read, one she would have liked. Emily Dickinson. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant, I recited. Success in circuit lies. And I thought about how true that was, how sometimes the truth is too bright to look at directly, how sometimes we have to approach it sideways, slowly, in pieces. Maybe that's what I'm doing now, telling the truth slant, finding my way to it through story and confession and the slow, painful work of understanding. My mother died without knowing. That's the truth, and I have to live with it. But she also died knowing she was loved. Knowing her children adored her, knowing she'd built a life that mattered. Maybe that's the truth too. Maybe both things can be true at once. Maybe that's the only way any of us survive. I'm 36 years old. I'm a corporate attorney. I have a sister I'm finally close to again. I have a father I may never speak to again. And I have a mother who I miss every single day. I lied to her for years. She died without knowing. And somehow, I have to find a way to keep living. That's my confession. That's my truth. Thank you for listening.